All right. I believe we are live. Welcome everybody back to Truth Warrior. It's been a little bit, but man, has a lot of news transpired. I've been covering it on my social media. If you've been following me over on X, you can follow me there over at Truth Warrior Dad. Also on Substack Notes, you can get me over there at DW Truth Warrior. I've been putting my 2 cents in the mix and watching from over here in Canada with what's been going on with Trump in America, with Iran, the Israel thing. And I've done some presentations on some of these subjects on my Truth Warrior channels. But what I really want to draw everybody's attention to today is the incredibly crucial work that we've been doing over on Unslaved, particularly Michael Tsarion's research that he's brought up. And I've been learning so much over the years. We started getting into this rabbit hole, particularly the subjects we're going to get in today, back in 2016, even before Trump actually won the first term election. We've been covering that over on Unslaved. We've had many guests like Chuck Morris and Trevor Louden and Chuck Sasser and Ralph Ellis. And of course, Michael's brought his research into the fore about the bigger level, the more ancient occult roots, getting into the history of the Guyonum and the whole thing. We talked about the Islamo-communism, which is the big piece here, I think, that everybody's missing. And so I want to get into that. And Michael has kindly, last minute, been able to join me today. So he's going to be jumping in with me here live. So stay tuned for that. I just wanted to give a little precursor here. And so I just want to highlight the importance of this research, because I feel like what we're going to be talking about in this show today. So don't go anywhere. If you can't stay for the whole live, pause it, come back later, watch the archive. We're going through an incredible amount of information here today that I think is crucial and that's missing from the calculations of a lot of the mainstream alternative influencers out there that right now have a lot of egg on their face. And I think I know where it went wrong. But we'll see as we go. But just before we do that, I just want to say that you can now get Unslaved Podcast on Substack. We're slowly adding the archive over there so people can stay on the website, unslaved.com. Or if you love the Substack platform, which I personally do, there's a lot of great content there. It's a great platform. You can now get these episodes over on Substack. You can also follow Michael's personal account. He's got a personal account. Look him up on Substack, Michael Tsarion. He's writing all kinds of articles and putting out an entire book for free on the platform. And he's been talking about all kinds of subjects: psychology, history, philosophy, geopolitics, secret societies, conspiracy research, all kinds of ancient mysteries and things like that. So make sure you go to and check that out. I'll put the links below once we're done the show here. But today I wanted to bring Michael on to help give an overview, because if I think back to the first time we covered this subject of all these alliances that I've been speaking about, I just did a show about this, talking about the alliances of these various groups that all have the same objective of destroying America, destroying the West. We've been getting into this since 2016, and it would be impossible for us to summarize all that research in one show. But I thought, wow, the timing is perfect right now, given the events that we're going to be discussing with Iran, with Israel, Palestine, with Trump, with America, what just took place, the return of the king in Iran, this New York mayor candidate that is basically a Shia Muslim that's going to get put into or allegedly being put into the mayoral position in New York, always backed by the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs, which is once again more evidence of this secret handshaking business going on behind the scenes with these groups, the ideological similarities that most people wouldn't spot, but that was spotted on the Unslaved podcast years ago. So there's my little intro. Let me go ahead and bring Michael in, and we can get right into this discussion. And there he is. Michael, thank you so much for jumping on here, brother. Last minute. I know it's late, and we've been doing so much work lately, but to jump in at this time, I think was crucial. And I just want to thank you for opening my eyes to these books, to the research, introducing me to the works of so many people that have been shouting the alarm on this. And I can't believe how many people have missed this. They have missed this piece. They were talking the Steve Bannons, the Tucker Carlsons, the Candace Owens, Dave Smith. You got all these comedians and whatnot informing the American public right now, because the American public knows they can't trust CNN. They can't trust the fake news media. And so they went to the alternative. And now the alternative is now demonstrably loaded with people who are just either completely way off in their analysis, and there's probably reasons, or there might be some funding or some fifth columnist action going on in this alternative network. And you were the one to talk about this years ago when it came to the conspiracy research movement. So many things I've just thrown on the table there. First of all, welcome, and thanks for doing this with me.
Hey, it's a great pleasure. Thank you very much. I'm topical, and yeah, it's been something I've been into for years. And you're quite right. It still hasn't reached the public, the truth of it by a long chalk of what's been going on. So it's always good to get an opportunity to cover some of the less known facts. And you can't rely on even the right-wing media. They're no closer to the truth than the left-wing whack jobs, which is very sad. You would have thought by now, the people you just mentioned, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, you would have imagined that that type of person would have been bang on. And I was really disappointed to find out that they're not. And of course, this will impact not just Middle East politics. It's going to impact what happens in America, because these pro-terrorist jihadist sects are alive and well. They practically run Britain, and have done since about the 70s, and have a huge traction even in America, because, as we know, there's internal enemies as well as external enemies. And so posturing, like when you had neoconservatives, who I think actually meant well, I think they had a grasping and understanding to a degree of the threat of Islamic jihadists, Islamic extremism. They had that peace, but they fought it in lands abroad with far too little intel on the history. And so that was basically a botched job. They lacked. They weren't listening to Trevor Loudon or Pamela Geller, or Gad Saad, or Charles Moskowitz, as you mentioned, or Ralph Ellis. They weren't listening to those people. They didn't have that peace. And so you got then this arch neoconservative cabal moving. And as I said, then you had pushback on that from ordinary sort of rhinos and the left. You even had a massive pushback in Israel from the left. You still got that, right? Benjamin Netanyahu and the conservative Jews over there, Israelis, have this pushback from within, and we have that in America. These are enormously, misinformed leftists. Well, I mean, most leftists are misinformed. That's how they managed to be. Liberalism was overtaken, it's a whole separate conversation, by these progressives and Frankfurt School types. So there's so many factors to this. But the way to pare it down, and if people had read the people I just mentioned, they would know this, is the history of Islam itself and what was going on. We've talked before about the fact that the Gutenberg press, which published the Bible into English, wasn't even around until 16th century, 1500s. Well, Islam has already been going for nearly 800 years by that time, and their Quran was read by everyone. So Christianity, as far as it reaching the public ear, was already on the back foot. It had been reserved for the Christian priestly cabal. If you want to call Christianity, it didn't even reach the people except in the most mutilated form. And even in the 16th century, do you think everybody was literate enough to read it, even though it was technically now possible to get hold? No, it wasn't. And the priests made sure that when the first Bibles were printed, they were chained to the lecterns. Still, it took until almost, can you believe this, the 19th century before people, ordinary intellectuals in the world, in Europe, had access actually to read the text and to critique it. It was still off the table. Great minds. I could list David Strauss. All of these sorts of people were professionally assassinated when they then, after reading the Bible, started to talk about the Christian myth. This actually goes back to the 1800s. And it was completely taboo then, as it is in later centuries, right? But the point being that the Islamic world has already burned into their brain the Hadith and all of the other, scriptures of Islam. Burned into their brains. Centuries before the Christian word was even able to be critiqued, let alone understood. And then the role in Islam of Jews and Christians is a whole other story of oppression and imperialism and murder. Then if you move up into the 20th century, the whole forming of the state of Israel and what was there before it, this nonsense about Palestine being owned by Palestinians, all of this nonsense, or the Jews have stolen the land. Stolen land from who? If you know anything about history, you'll know that that land was a part of the empire of the Ottoman Empire. It's called an empire because it wasn't theirs. They invaded it. These are the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Does anybody know even what that entails and who ran it and where it came from and the internal feuds that made it? And then the fact that what we call a Palestinian or any kind of Arab tribesman of the time, they were told to live there by the Sultan of the Ottoman oppressive, murderous empire. You didn't claim land to own it. There's no blood rights or inheritance. You were told, hey, guys, you are going to take that land. You live there. You do your sheep herding and, we apportion you there and you'll do as you're told and you'll live where you're told. Choice is not a matter. There's no Palestinian had any rights to any land. It's a myth. So then you have to ask yourself when you know the facts. Oh, yeah, and then later when it was made available, through the Balfour Declaration and things like that, it was purchased just in exactly the same way that California was purchased legally and properly by America from the Mexicans. But then you say, how come I don't know that? How come that's never been taught? Well, we should know by now. Look at the state of Harvard. Hasn't it all come out to the public ear? What is the state of education in America? So there's that piece now. You weren't told it because you were never meant to hear it. This is all based on a need-to-know basis. And most of people, while they're following P. Diddy and the Kardashians, they're not picking up books on the Ottoman Empire, are they? They couldn't care less about it. And they're watching PBS and NPR to get their headlines, or the gutter trash of CNN. See, one thing leads to another. These are all dominoes. Who's going to pick up the chain and find out what's really been going on? And so, unfortunately, this is not just a matter that indicts the ordinary person. It's right up the political ladder, the totem pole. The people in the senior positions of government don't know any of this history either. They bought the doggerel. They bought the surface idea. And this is the same with the Clintons and the Bushes and all that. Why do you think that Biden and Obama pacified Iran for all these years and gave them billions of dollars to facilitate? And why is it even more sinisterly? You have so-called conservative podcasters and influencers, people like Mark Dice, Paul Joseph Watson, and others of their ilk, absolutely contradicting themselves on a daily basis by taking the side of these alarmists and even preaching this anti-Israeli gospel. Don't you know that by doing that, any educated person can see your petticoats? Because the two people I've mentioned and the other ones like them are on paper, when you look at them from an American point of view, meant to be conservatives. In fact, some people would even call them far right. Maybe that's too much, but they were conservatives and they're on the right, allegedly. But don't you understand? By telling you that Iran is a good guy and has no ill intent and it's just some faraway war 7,000 miles away, they're aligning themselves exactly with the extreme left wing in Israel. Now, do you not spot the contradiction? Those left-wingers, whether they're in Israel or America, hate the two people I've mentioned and their ilk. So what is going on here? Somebody's got their wires crossed. Yeah, this all comes from this lack of knowledge. So from whichever angle you look, there's something really off. How can you call yourself an American conservative without this knowledge of Islamo-communism? How can you go that wrong? Well, maybe you're not going that wrong. Maybe you're being funded by the very underground group that I'm talking about. And that's why you have your message. And that's why you suffer no sorts of shadow banning. You're all over the media. And during the time even of harsh deplatforming, it never happened to you. See, I don't know. I think very differently. So I apologize for my ruminations. But see, when you know the underground story of the amount of the underground movements that are not just terroristic in the obvious sense. There's a money power, a black hand money power operating under what we call Islamo-communism. It's not inert, and it's not just located in the Middle East. That's optics. That you want to be seen like that. So that's what the left hand, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And those who do know what's going on are so far and few between, and many of them have chosen not to publish on this matter. So, taken together with just the normal the stats on ignorance in the world, in the West, about history, about the Balfour Declaration and all the truisms that one could, and we've been talking about it for years. We've been doing absolutely master works on this, but it's never going to be popular. I mean, I've given up long ago. It's not going to be popular, but the truth is the truth regardless. So when now, sometimes though, a good thing happens. Sometimes some of the contradictions I'm talking about leak to the surface. They boil up so that the ordinary person, the layman, can spot these contradictions I'm talking about. And we're in exactly that place right now. So if you listen to some of these pundits, and this includes people on Fox, and certainly these the MAGA dissenters, and then these influencers, as I've just mentioned, it leaks up, and their contradictions are like hugely apparent to people. So I worry that everybody goes back to sleep and those are forgotten and can be swept under the carpet. No, these are the right time for you to spot these contradictions and remember them for the future. And even though you may identify with some of these people and like a lot of their content, as I myself do, you've got to be aware that there's more to it than that. And you've got to sort of also be sharp and critical enough that when they put their foot in it, and when the hidden agenda is being enunciated, you're spot on. You've caught it, and you bookmark and you go, that's not quite right. How can a conservative in America suddenly be identifying with the arch left whack jobs in Israel, who oppose what the prime minister there and the conservative policy is over there? Isn't that absolutely counterintuitive? How can you be aligning yourself with people who absolutely despise you, but suddenly you're both of your ideologies now are doing a little marvelous little waltz together? All of a sudden, something's wrong with this picture. And a critical person in his own guard. So we can leave it there. But my God, be aware of these things. Very, very important.
It's where I'm at, and this is why I'm glad you were able to come and do this. And it's my thoughts as well that there's a much bigger. You mentioned the bigger hidden hand. It's not just located in the Middle East. You've done presentations on Unslaved, the Eastern Illuminati, getting into that sort of faction. No one else that I've come across, even some of the guys you've mentioned, have collated it all together the way you have. There's the people you mentioned that'll give you the tidbits. Like I've got Amir Tahiri's book, Holy Terror, here, right? And we can go through the history of the Templars and all that, and then the history of the liaisons. We've been doing this on the shows. We did some with Caleb Lamont on this. Getting into all these. Basically, the idea here is, regardless of anybody's particular religious or secular beliefs, we're talking about an attack that took place at the institutional level in the West. The target is the West. So the way I rationalized all these weird alliances going on, like how do you have queers for Palestine? How do you have in Toronto right now, Michael, in Toronto, Ontario? I used to live there. There's protests. So they had everybody's swapping out flags. They're switching out the Palestinian flag for the Iranian regime flag. And they've got pictures of the bastard that runs the regime. And they're like standing in solidarity with the Islamic regime. And all I've been trying to do is tell people, look, especially Canadians that have no clue at all about what's going on at the geopolitical level here, never mind the history of it, is go listen to an Iranian person tell you this. I started doing that in X, or on X, on that platform. They have something called Spaces. And you can go in and you can actually converse with people that fled from the Iranian regime. And that's what I started doing. I'd go into these spaces and I'd start raising my hand. We'd be talking to these people, and they will tell you the history of the Islamic takeover of Iran and how it got taken off its other much more natural Western progressive approach, where we wouldn't have had all this funding seedbed or hotbed of terrorism all throughout the Middle East, right? We would have had the rise of this Persian empire. We've had Jason Georgiani on back in the day, Unslaved, to talk about the Iranian Leviathan thesis that he had. But many others as well were commenting on what was going on in Iran. They were saying, how is it that, and there's some of them live in Ontario or whatever, and they were like, how is it that I'm an Iranian that fled that regime to come to a place like Canada or America? And I try to talk to the locals there, and they tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. And they're like, I literally fled the freaking regime. I saw what they do. Those guys don't go to watch Taylor Swift concerts on the weekend over there. They go watch women getting stoned and hanged, or people getting I don't think people understand it, right? Let alone what you were hinting at, which is that that's just one little pie that you got to watch. What about the alliances between these Marxist groups, the Marxist infiltration or I guess handshaking that was going on with these Islamists? We broke down also the handshaking with the fascist regimes, with the Nazis, with the meeting of Hitler and his top guys with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and all of that. The funneling of Nazi propaganda into the Middle East for decades, right? That people don't know about. And then it all rises up, and you realize, well, the woke radical left in America, the Marxists, the socialists, your AOCs, right? There's that wing. So Trump as a president has to deal with like the enemy from within that's kind of part of their own camp. They've made alliances with these Islamists that maybe they just have their own agenda and it just so happens to work for the guys on the high table. And then you got to worry about the threats from China and Russia and all these other things. And I think what's happening is people don't understand that there's been alliances formed behind the scenes from groups that on the surface would be completely antithetical to each other, right? And this is where, when you started breaking this down years ago and we started bringing all the guests in and doing all the deep diving, my mind has not ceased to be blown on a daily basis about how many factoids I could bring up from just following the current news that are vindicating that argument. And here we are, I think, with the biggest vindication of all about what just took place over the last 12 days.
That's right. Yeah. And see, while the world thought that Russia and China were threats, and they are to a degree, they never saw Islam. Islam was only something that threatened Israel. So when secret societies use the term hoodwinking people, it implies that there's a hood over your head. And there has been a hood over the head of most Western people for a long, long time, particularly in regards what Israel is, what it stands for, who its enemies are, and all the rest of it. And so the loud protesting voices, the lady doth protest too much, in the form of these influencers, is still attempting to frame a picture of Israel that's utterly false. It's so widespread and it's so insinuative that most people can't think outside of it and have absolutely zero intention of trying to see outside of it. The thing that you've just done by going to a source online and chatting with these people, that you mentioned, is something that nobody bothers doing. That's the real research. And then a picture starts to form. What is Islam? What are its own internal rivalries? How is it hijacked? That after the Second World War, everyone knows about Operation Paperclip, in which Nazis were found in Uruguay and Paraguay, and this boys from the Brazil concept. Okay, but how many of you knew that Egypt was flooded with ex-Nazis? And how many of you know what Nazism really is? And that the word fascist is not as far away from communist or socialist as you imagine. You see? So we're knee deep in mythology. People are still so far away from the truth, and it doesn't make one bit of difference that you're talking about the so-called truth community. That is a laugh. I spit on that. And I've had to have decades. Why do you think we do the work on Enslaved? Because I'm tired of listening to the great influencers in this movement who just don't know what British history or Jewish history or even early Christian history is all about. Egypt and Turkey I mean, anyone listening with a German background here knows that Germany's one of its closest allies is Turkey, and always has been since the days of the Ottoman Empire. If you go back to the First World War and before, Turkey and Germany and Turkey, name me one person who can explain, listening to us right now, why they can explain that connection. Why was the Turkish Empire friendly with the Protestant German in the First World War, the Kaiser? Wouldn't that mean that maybe both of them were opposed to the British Empire under Disraeli and maybe the Russian Empire? See, right away, you're into things that nobody can answer. What's the role of Armenia in all of this? I'll just give you one anecdote about the Sultan and the Ottoman Empire. Yeah. So while the focus has been on China and Russia being the big threat, and that more obvious Bolshevik type of, Mao version of communism, your eyes were taken off the far more sinister form of Islamo-communism, because these Nazi ideologues who never saw arrest and were very wealthy were welcomed by people like you rightly said, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. Not just him. You can see pictures of him sitting with Hitler right now. Just type it in. Hitler meets Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. And that alone should smoke your conventional understanding of history. What the hell can Islam have to do with Nazism? Well, you'll still never crack it until you understand what Nazism itself is. And it's not, or what fascism is. It's a form of socialism. And it's one that appealed to the Arabs and the Turks, who were fighting each other for centuries. They have nothing in common, except that they happen to live close by. And before the discovery of oil, remember that thing, oil? Look, they hadn't discovered oil in the 1930s and 20s. This all happened in living memory, by the way. Your Saudi Arabias, your Emirates. When do you think they discovered oil? Do you know how recent it was? Before that, these people were camel herders and very little else. And they were made up of tribes that butchered each other, brothers, cousins, whatever. And the British Empire tried to bring some fucking order to this nightmare. And the Turkish Empire had it under control in exactly the way that later Saddam Hussein had these mullahs under control and these radical groups. Take Saddam Hussein out, which this idiot Bush did, and you let them run riot. Everyone, people of sense knew that this would happen. The same way that when you took the Shah of Iran out of power in the 1980 under Carter, this is what caused all the mayhem you've got today, and a great Aryan culture. And by the way, they are high Aryans, the Persians. High Aryans. Understand the meaning and the depth of that word? And what kind of an empire had to be suppressed? Was a danger to the British Empire? And why the greatest British agents were put into it? That they are responsible for the mess? They are responsible for funding radical Islam? And when the moment the Shah was deposed, in comes the Ayatollah Khomeini and his radical gang, funded by British money. Funded by what at that time would have been the proto-Islamo-communists that have been around, as I say, for a long time. They had to take out Iran, and they've done it until today. They're still not, until a new prince is put back, the Shah's brother, Shah's son, we're not even close to the real solution at all. But as I say, these ideologues, these Nazi ideologues, with their socialist agenda, that's the key, go over to Islam. Now, when they went to Islam, it wasn't the older Islamic community that really made sense of anything in those days. It was the youth. And so what you have are several groups. One of them is the Pan-Arabic movement. You can look that up. And the Pan-Turkic movement, sometimes also known as the Young Turks. All of this stuff can be looked up online. The Young Turkish movement, the Young Turks. Now, these were originally the Young Ireland, Young Germany, Young Russia. These are all left-wing communist groups under the leadership of the Illuminati, under Giuseppe Mazzini and a whole host of people that nobody's ever heard of. So what's the point of mentioning it? You have a program yourself you made called The Occult History of Communism. I suggest people start with that. So but what people again don't know is that this had moved east into the Near and Middle East. And the Pan-Arabic movement, remember I said Arabs and Turks had been fighting each other for years, and this is particularly true before the discovery of oil. They hated each other. And what you now know as the kings and princes of Saudi Arabia are just the winners, the ones who butchered the most of their own families to become powerful. They weren't aware that they were sitting on billions of dollars of oil and all this. Just giving you a little background. And the British didn't even realize it for a while. And this was all going on while Israel was being, founded, and the Israelis were given this land. So after the Second World War, the Nazis went out and were welcomed by this Arabic group who had already been softened towards socialism from the First World War onwards, and maybe even from before. It's a long story. We're trying to abbreviate it here. But when the Nazis went out, they collaborated. Many of them have learned fluent Arabic, and many of them even converted to Islam. This is a story you're never meant to know about. And they were treated like royalty. Because, as I said, from the beginning, not the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, but from the moment that the 20th century began, there was a close collusion, right, around the time of the First World War, between Germany and Turkey. Germany and Turkey. Remember that. So later on, Germans were welcomed, just in the same way that later we have an invasion of Turks into Germany. It's one of the biggest immigrant group going into Germany today is the Turks. Why would the doors open to them specifically? It's all again to do with what we're talking about now. That collusion has existed for decades. But cast your mind back to this period, where leading Nazi ideologues are converting to Islam and going over into Islamic countries, and which have already been softened towards socialism through the Pan-Arabic and Pan-Turkic movements. If you look those terms up on, say, something like Wikipedia, the first thing you see is a red flag. They come under the worldwide socialistic network. And we won't continue going on with their history, but because I just want to make a simple point. How come you ain't never heard of it? How come in all the reports on television and the documentaries galore, nobody's ever talked about this? And when you really go into it, like we've done on Unslaved, well, you can go way back into more even distant times and find out that some of the biggest Jewish communities were in Turkey after the Jews were suppressed in southern Spain, Sephardic Jews. Turkey, of all places. Now, remember, this is a Muslim state. The Sultan and various other leaders of Turkey welcomed Jews in their hundreds of thousands to come from Spain into Turkey, and they did. And they moved to a city called Salonika. I think it's called Thessalonica now. And so one of the largest Jewish communities on earth was here. But the other thing to realize is that when they were invited to Salonika, they were treated very well, which is unusual for Jews to be treated well. Yeah, they also were in Baghdad heavily. But let's just keep the focus here on Turkey. So a very, very large group of privileged Jews lived in Salonika and did very, very well. So this ties in with Jewish history as well. And it turns out that some of these people became billionaires. Have you ever heard in, the James Bond franchise? You have a character called Blofeld. Blofeld, who appears in several James Bond, the guy stroking the cat and all this, right? Master criminal, is based on a real character called Basil Zaharoff. You can look him up. And he is just one of these billionaire arms dealers, underground figure from Salonika, from the Turkish Empire. Turkish Jews. Another thing nobody's ever heard about. And so and these are the Jews who are very important in conspiracy research. The anti-Semites don't know anything about this. They're throwing darts in the dark. And so some of these rich merchant families became Macy's. And they're part of the Young Turkish movement. Young Turks being mostly Turks, yes. But there's also this crypto-Jewish aspect. So when you're sniffing around looking for a Jewish conspiracy, I'll give you some advice. Why don't you try looking in the right place? Instead of just throwing wild diatribes against, Mr. Steinberg living at the end of the street. Let's go burn him out. He's got a Jewish name. Yeah, nice going. Don't confuse these people with them. But again, back to this thing. We are undereducated in some of the most fundamental aspects of the movement of this Islamo-communistic group, because it was seeded by Nazis who are not normally thought of as being socialist. Again, that's thanks to your colleges, thanks to your teachers. There's no need to be idealizing teachers, especially in America. These are dogs. It's like when Bill Hicks said, if you're a marketing guy, by God, and blow your brains out. I convert that and say, if you're a teacher, at least lower your eyes in shame of what you've been teaching kids or what you've not been teaching them about their world. Now, this hand has been operating. So while all the focus is on what Israel's doing and Israel is this and Israel is that, Israel's not your problem. Israel has never been your problem. In fact, Israel is closer to the group that knows what the hell I'm talking about to a degree and has been at least trying to do something about it all these years. Talk about picking the wrong horse. You've been riding the horse backwards as well. But even outside that, even if you don't happen to like Israel or you have this thing again, look, it wouldn't even matter. Are you on target when it comes to what Islam has been doing in your lands in the West and its agenda? And the answer is no. If you had been, Jimmy Carter would never have got rid of the Shah. And we probably wouldn't have even got rid of Saddam Hussein. We would have tried to bring him to the table and negotiate. But Halliburton wasn't interested in that. And the Carlyle Group wasn't interested in that. And the neocons, although I think that some of them were good, well-intentioned, in the end, no, their agenda just doesn't work. And so that was a colossal mistake. But that mistake wouldn't have even happened had the Shah of Iran been allowed to be kept in place. Because when that happens, let me just explain it in simple Disney world language. If Iran had have prospered as a nation in the area, in the region under the Shah, and had been more, kept modern and Americanized and westernized, what do you think the shithole of Palestine would have looked like? Or Iraq, or Qatar, or Jordan, or Egypt. They barely can cut it now. And by the way, it's a little bit popping up just how useless Iran is now militaristically. I mean, that is a fact that's on the table right now. They never were a major military threat. A lot of loud gas coming out of the mouths of some of the most fanatical people on planet, infected by Islamo-communism. I hope I've made that clear. But they've never been anything like a militaristic threat. That's why they need underground terrorist organizations to murder people, ordinary folks. They're doing it right now in Israel. They don't target military establishments. No, they like killing women and children. Get it? But had the Shah been allowed to raise Persia to its heights, even half of its heights of what it could have been under his rule, I'm afraid that it would have made the balance of power so different in the Middle East that what passes for countries and nations today would have looked like miserable shitholes that they really are. That couldn't be allowed. Now, everything I'm saying has been without the discovery of oil. I'm trying to give you a sketch of a situation that existed prior to the moment when oil was discovered. Right after that, we have another conversation. Because now this foul group of socialistic Islamo-communism is bankrolled. So now when you go to London and find out that there's no white people living there, it's everything, every single brick is owned by a Muslim or an Arab or a Turk. And basically it's the same in New York, and now it's spread right across. Ask yourself how that happened. And then ask yourself, that's a Jewish conspiracy, right? While you're worrying about Jews, there's streets in England where there's not a single white person living. That's a Jewish conspiracy, right? 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 The Turkish barbers, the Islamic grooming gangs, the jihadists, cells that are all over your country. This is all because of Jews. And yet, that's all you know. That's all you know. And it's all a lot of people want you to know. A lot of people in the so-called conspiracy movement, I'm sad to say. Now, we know that on Unslaved, and we've been operating that way and digging deep with that in mind. So we have some extraordinary programs. You're quite right. On the Guyonum, I would definitely recommend Princes of Light. People can start with articles I've done on that. And yeah, Eastern Illuminati fits there. We've done some even recently on this subject. So it's important. But until you've got this piece about the First World War period, all this time leading up to the discovery of oil, you can't understand it. And then at this key moment in history, when oil was discovered, these camel herders hadn't the faintest idea how to mine it. So this is when British companies and later American companies, in other words, white people, Western people, had to go into Bahrain and into these shitholes and show them how to dig it up. Just in the same way that this modern Western architects that's got to go over to Dubai today, right, and Qatar, and build their houses for them. Did you know that? Do you know the architectural nightmare that exists over in those countries when they try to do it themselves? Big cities and big houses, there's no sewage systems. We just forgot. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just go for the photogenics. Just go for the optics. Yeah. Okay. Don't look close up. Well, back in the days of oil, when it was just dawning on them that this might be of value, they had to import Western engineers and Western geologists to help them, process it. Without that, they still wouldn't know how to sell you a barrel of oil to this day. But as I said, that's a different conversation, in the aftermath of becoming billionaires, to the more deeper history that we've just been trying to sketch in a little bit. And some of it affects Israel, the founding of that place through the Balfour Declaration, and many things that people don't know about, have no idea about, don't care about. And now with the Islamo-communists in the greatest positions of power in the world, thankfully not in the Trump administration, but they've been there with Obama and Biden. That's why billions were given to Iran, and there's no other reason. They don't want the Shah or any of his relatives coming back. This is a nightmare. And that's why it's pivotal what's just happened right now, because we're on the cusp of that. I hope that does continue, naturally, of course. But that wasn't the original plan by any means, you see. They couldn't have one of the greatest Aryan empires that the world has ever known rise up for what it would do in contrast. And then we have to ask, well, who would be the people in the West that would be threatened by that? Who are these Jimmy Carters? What kind of forces are behind them? The Council on Foreign Relations? I mean, who doesn't want those Arab countries to do well? Especially Iran. And then who pulled the plug on Iran, put it into the hands of these lunatics. And by the way, the Ayatollah was languishing in style in Paris for all those decades. In Paris, living like a multimillionaire, like one of these, again, as I say, criminal underworld figures from James Bloody Bond. and just walked in on a red carpet to take over Iran once the Shah was deposed. One of the worst things that's ever happened in world history. So, the question arises then, who would want that? How could it possibly get brokered? And why the hell is America, of all places, behind it? Why was Bush behind the destruction of Saddam Hussein? Mission accomplished. Remember all those ludicrous photographs where he dresses up as if he's a pilot? Are you having me on? That was on the front of Time magazine? And people bought it? Mission accomplished? What, for Halliburton? They were all in bed with a Carlyle group that was in bed with Osama bin Laden. So Gaddafi, Islamo-communist, right? This Ayatollah, Islamo-communist. The leadership of Pakistan, Islamo-communist. And this explains then why the ultra-progressive LGBTQ set in the West, paradoxically, against all logic, is siding with them big time. And you can see it in their protests and in the symbolism they use. That is never, the penny will never drop until you digest the things we're talking about as to how the left can collude and why it is that even some, as I started off talking about, allegedly conservative influencers with millions of subscribers suddenly find themselves doing a waltz with their enemies in Israel. But they're the same. How can that even take place unless somebody's got a screw loose, or there's something I don't know about history? Something. How can left-wing lunatics in Israel be siding with people they normally hate, conservative pundits and influencers in America? This is just impossible to plug in unless you understand this deeper backstory. Now it all fits together. So,
Well, that's just incredible. And just guys, as you're listening, Michael's giving these points bit by bit. We've got it all documented. Okay. We've got all the receipts on this stuff. We've been documenting it for years on Unslaved in long form podcasts with presentations and the whole thing. If you want to get into the receipts and the sauce on this, that's where you want to go. And the one thing that I think we could pivot to really quickly here is the work we did with the interview we did with Trevor Louden, who's a guy who comes from South Africa, who has a totally different perspective to bring to the West. And it's a fascinating interview in itself. I was re-listening to it this morning. I've got a few clips to go through, but the one thing I want to show people is he did a film. He actually did 2 films on this subject. One was talking about, I think it's called The Enemy Within. Okay. We've been speaking about that forever on this show too, about the enemy within. You got the deep state, right? Shadow government. Well, what's it made up of? What kind of people are part of that? What's their agenda? Who are they in bed with? You're getting a crash course right now. But Trevor Louden made a whole documentary in 2016 on the cusp of the first Trump election, and the fate that would have suffered America had Hillary made it past, with her promise to, all the promises that she made to basically keep the 16-year plan of destroying America going. Meanwhile, dressing it up, making it look like the Democrats are the real patriots. We're the real Americans. When you look at their ideology, you look at how their states are run, and it's completely the opposite. So he points out these contradictions. And so very quickly here, I want to show you guys the trailer for this film, because he kind of summarizes some points. And I know Michael will be activated after this, because there's some good stuff that he brings in. Let me just quickly bring it in here. So this is the trailer. I recommend everybody go and check it out. You can get it online. The sources are there. But let me just go ahead and bring this one in here. Here we go. Oh, it's just doing its thing. Bear with me one sec. Actually, I'm not going to do it like that. Sorry, guys. We're going to do this. Sorry, Restream just giving me a hassle here. Okay, here we go.
My name is Trevor Louden.
Trevor Louden is a guy from New Zealand. He's a dad who is concerned about the world.
I'm an activist, author and researcher from Christchurch, New Zealand.
He is the official commie hunter.
For 5 years, I've been traveling to the United States to expose the greatest act of betrayal in modern history.
That old school communism that you saw with the USSR, it's not dead, it's alive and well, and it's not just in North Korea.
The United States, a country founded on the very principles of liberty and freedom, whose soldiers have shed blood for more than 200 years to protect, is now facing the most dangerous enemy it has ever seen, the enemy within.
I've been following your stuff for a long time, and it's overwhelming.
Why is America slowly sinking into poverty, despair, and socialism? Why is the American economy teetering on the brink of collapse? Why are the allies of the United States slowly backing away as its enemies become more brazen? Is this all an accident, perhaps a coincidence, or just inevitable decline? Or has this been a deliberately engineered attack on the greatest nation the world has ever seen?
We actually have bad actors who have penetrated our system, basically making decisions the way Iran and North Korea and China and Russia would like us to make decisions.
So basically Trojan horses inside the infrastructure.
Yeah, an insider threat.
America has enemies operating in the highest levels of the federal government who are deliberately working to bring the nation to its knees.
If you look at every policy that the Obama administration has instituted, it has an older brother living in Venezuela.
The enemies within names names and pulls no punches. It exposes exactly how hardcore anti-American activists have penetrated the highest branches of the US government and are working together to destroy the Constitution and finally extinguish the American dream.
We're seeing the disintegration of a noble world order.
If America falls, every Western country goes down.
If America is weakened, our allies are weakened. And then we talk about dominoes.
Every free nation will fall alongside her.
Understand what this is really about.
We've never been in more danger from these powers.
The enemies within will expose the names, reveal the faces, and show you what the mainstream media won't allow you to see.
The enemy is within because they are in our government.
So there you go. Quick little trailer. I was watching the film this morning. Guys, it is earth-shattering. And it was made in 2016. And then Trevor went on to make one about how there's enemies within the church, which gets into the work Michael has been doing forever. He wrote an article called The Red Papacy, which I'm going to link to this one that everybody needs to read, about how the Catholic Church was infiltrated by this socialism as well. And so, you know, we also did a great interview with Trevor back in 2016 on Unslaved. It's featured over on Substack. You can go and check it out right now. You can go on unslaved.com and watch it right now. And it is just amazing because of the time that we did that interview, how many things Trevor talks about in that interview that have actually happened, like little predictions that he was making that happened. How they went after Trump, what Trump would try to do to stop it, what they would try to do to get him back. It's amazing. And then the way he lists the backstory that, Michael, you've been breaking down here is just incredible. So just sort of first reactions to Trevor's work and that trailer.
Well, I love the man's work, and it was so great to have him on. We will again. And Pamela Geller, Gad Saad, there's some good writers out there. I recommend all his works and his films as well. See, when I put this first out on YouTube, we were shadow banned. So America doesn't want this information out. Not from him, not from anybody. And so that's why we had to do the work on a private platform. That's why Enslaved got created, by the way. Because the moment that I started to put this information on Facebook, back around 2011, 12, that kind of time, we had a few good years, but then the shadow banning came in, and immediately, as soon as you start going against Islamo-communism, these platforms shut you down. And so in 2016, you and I discovered this, and we had no choice but to go private. So on those platforms is dynamite. On unslaved.com, you will find the real McCoy. We've been hunkering down on it, not just doing it spasmodically, but doing it very, very systematically, recommending people like Amir Tahiri, and slowly going through their work. But Trevor was on, and it certainly, highly, and of course Charles Moskowitz. We've had him on about 6 times. Very important to understand his work on left-wing anti-Semitism, and all of the different things we've done. So we're very proud of that catalog, and it is all on Substack as well. People want to join up through that means. But the shadow banning shows you that, just like Loudon is saying there's forces in America that are absolutely not wanting you to know about this. So they keep your focus on Israel doing this and Israel doing that and all of that, and they keep your focus on China and Russia. And if these countries happen to do something that looks like it's a good optics, then the whole media, including the so-called conservative channels, go for it, so that the consensus is kept. And by constantly pulling the rug and just using the daily headlines to shake you up, you just don't have the time, you see, to step back and look at it in a bigger way. And so for many, many decades, way before even Reagan, we've been kept in the dark about Islamo-communism. What we call neoconservatism is a very poor antidote to it. It was a first attempt, Well, some of them were well-meaning in that sense, but it was ultimately a big fail for numerous reasons we could go into, right? But it was the closest, at least, America's ever been to being vigilant. Let's put it that way. But it was paltry. It wasn't enough. And also, it was made to look bad by a media. A media won the day there because they only skimmed the surface. And they didn't really want to show you what the truth of it was all about. So this is where, of course, there's a deficit then, in terms of the popular media and what popular people know. And then part of the agenda of this group that we're talking about is to release a torrent of anti-Semitism online. The advent of the internet has not helped this cause, because through Facebook, TikTok, and just the media the internet in general, the anti-Semitic message has gone out and been highly mobilized. Now, it turns out that there's a Russian connection here as well, because what people don't know is that, remember you hinted earlier about the right wing, what's laughingly called the far right. The actual far right is funded by Vladimir Putin. So once you if that's a bucket of ice water over your head and you come back to your senses, if you can swallow that. But the other beloved group that Putin and the Russians adore are the Chechen rebels. They're Muslims. Muslims make up almost 70% of the Russian army. They're a huge factor in Russia, right? And all that Soviet missiles, that were slightly out of date or whatever, he's been pouring it into the Islamic terrorist groups. I think the amount of nuclear weapons that he gave them, sold them dirt cheap, and this would also be to Pakistan and Libya, by the way, but to the Chechen rebels. And then it's a black hand. It's like I told you, this is underground. And so Islam is funded to the teeth in terms of large ships and these nuclear weapons that they didn't know how to use them, obviously. So Russia sent experts to Pakistan to teach the scientists there how to assemble these parts for the nuclear weapons. So it's not that Iran and other places weren't doing it too. It's a long circle, though, that starts in Pakistan, ends up in Libya, at least this was in the past, and then comes to places like Iran. So it's more complex than the media lets you know. But basically what it means is that any Islamic underground group, especially in Palestine, Yasser Arafat was part of this whole cycle, they can get their hands on nuclear weapons, all right, if they want to. It's a huge threat. And behind it is Vladimir Putin. So if you really want to point at the Russians, again, as I say, by all means do these things, but do it right. And if you want to point at Jews, go ahead, but do it right. Know what you're talking about so that innocent people are not blamed or attacked. Okay? There's more history behind this than people know. So just realize that if you see a neo-Nazi group today, a real neo-Nazi, a real far-right group, they have been mobile since the Second World War ended. It's been communist Russia and people like Vladimir Putin who funded it. An obvious version of this, of course, would be the story of Ukraine with the Wagner group. They're all Nazis, but they're funded by the Russians. You see, there's an example, just one example. But if you think that's the extent of it, oh, do you need a lesson? All the neo-Nazi movements in the world, wherever these skinhead groups, wherever they rise them up, are funded by Russian money. Just to let you know that piece. But side by side with that, Russia also funds the Muslims, the jihadists. There's a tie-in because it's Islamo-communism, and it's been active in our world right outside your door, and you haven't known anything about it. And then when somebody like Louden or Geller or anybody else jumps up to try and paint you a picture, they're automatically suppressed. So you've got to go out of your way, you see. That's what the message is to the public. If you want to educate yourself, and by the way, I'm giving you a sketch here. Everything we've talked about is merely the surface story. On Enslaved in the Future, we have several projects to get done, but when we have, we're going to be going into something absolutely central. I mean, absolutely groundbreaking in terms of this. But I don't want to go into it now. But it definitely corresponds with exactly what Trevor Louden is saying, but it even adds pieces that they don't have. And it's research I need to get to in the proper time, in the right way. And it's so radical that, of course, you need to do it right because it's just groundbreaking. But this is part of the story. And it's a large story that goes back to early times, to the times before oil was discovered, right? And then the policies of people like Disraeli and Churchill and others in terms of what do we do with these Arabs? Well, it turns out, as I said, and I just gave you a little sketch there, that before oil was discovered, the youth were absolutely 100% infected by communism. So this would mean after 1917, we didn't have communism before that. You had sort of Fabian socialism or something different in the 1800s. But by the early 20th century, and we have this Bolshevik revolution taking place in Russia and all of its subsequent propaganda, did you know that it was influencing the hell out of the youth in Arabian and Turkish countries? And even as far away as India, which is one of the most communist countries on the planet. Did you know that? There wasn't a single teacher in the entire continent of India that wasn't a Marxist since the period we're talking about right up to the present. So it's not just China and North Korea are the bad actors. If you really knew your stuff, you'd know India is one of the most Marxist countries. That Pakistan, that Afghanistan, you see, all of this other stuff that the West has no clue about, and you're not meant to know about it. So they just say, "Oh, we got Osama bin Laden to worry about, right?" You know what I mean? Yeah. It's called monotheism, focusing your attention on a narrow part of it and making sure that however that's turned and framed, it remains narrow so that you're never told about the background and you're not allowed to hear any sound bites from anyone who does know it. When's Amir Tahiri was ever interviewed? Today we're quite lucky. There's a few Loudens out there and Gad Sads and people on the Ayn Rand Institute that will inform you, but you've got to go looking for it, folks. And then I find out that you turn on the alternative media, your Alex Jones types and all, and they're not dealing with it either. So this is where now Michael Stein got pissed. I would have expected much more from the alternative research community. And guess what? It's a big fucking zero. And they don't come to your aid. I know this. All your David Ikes are card-carrying communists. I wonder who's funding them. Well, anyway, I don't want to burden you with my worries. We won't go there. But it just turns out, but as I said, there's more to get into about this story. And it goes back to the time before oil was discovered. And then when you have these sick ideologies that maybe without the discovery of oil, you see, they were intellectual. And it wasn't everyone. They just didn't have the traction. This was for students like from Harvard today. This level of Marxism merging with marrying with Islamic teachings, right? It's a study. How did it happen? Well, it did. But obviously, it only appealed to a couple of cranky, weirdo progressives of that day. It's never going to catch on. But then something happened that changed the geopolitics of the world, and that is the discovery of oil, not just in one Arab country, but in many. And now one of the consequences of that infusion of wealth was that the groups that we're talking about here now became much more mobilized. They had the financing to spread like an infection throughout the world. Like I said, into India and the other places. And so this is one of the great threats that Louden is wonderfully talking about, Trevor Louden. So while you're focused on the Bolshevik version of Russia and China and North Korea, your eyes are not on the Islamic version, and this now, what this does though, is it says whether you like Islam as a religion or not becomes a separate question and a separate problem, right? Islamo-communism is a separate question. So I may like Christianity or I may not like Christianity. But left-wing, if Christianity is infected by left-wing ideology, we're onto a different subject. And it's the same with Islam. It's the same with Judaism. You get cranky left-wing nutball whack jobs in Judaism. And they're a major, major problem. And you need to know about them because they play a role in all of this. And you have it in the political left in America, who are some of the sickest and stupidest people walking the planet. You've seen them raging around in Los Angeles recently. They're talking about no kings. But it's okay for King Soros and King Obama. Didn't they treat him like a king when he was voted in? Well, look at this, Joe Biden. He wasn't a king. But Trump is the king you don't like? Isn't this a creature, Trudeau? You're telling me he was treated less as a king than Donald Trump? Look at the derangement of these people. So it's two hands to clap. This was set in motion in the days of Carter, but my God, if you think it all started there with it, the deposition of the Shah was just one big hurrah that they had in the 1980s. But the 40 years before that, the discovery of, the founding of Israel. Before that, you've got the First World War and the collusion between the Turks and the Germans to look into. Before that, you've got the very phenomena of the Ottoman Empire itself. What is it? What was its worldview? What was its role in its different colonies? And so when the pro-Palestinian people are giving you all this guff about them owning the land, they don't want you to know about the Ottoman Empire and the Sultan and the bankruptcy finally in the last days of the Ottoman Empire that then forced the Sultan against his will. But they were so bankrupt, they brought in Germany to try and help them as an empire for many decades, but that ended up not working. And so finally the Sultan had to sell the land to the Jews. To get that? Sell the land to the Jews, who had been wanting it for years anyway. Zionism goes back up far. You wouldn't believe how far back that goes. And they had the money and they bought it. And with it came the wealth of the Dead Sea area. which is rich in minerals. We've gone into all of this in our programs. And so they became very wealthy. They had the money to then finally buy weapons from the West to help protect themselves. Nothing wrong with that. They did well because they're very industrious. But the same old policy applies. Just in the same way that you couldn't have a modern Iran rising up to shame all these other Arab countries, in the same way you cannot have Israel there to put to shame all the other Muslim countries, the toilets that they are. But again, back to the point. As far as we know, the social media platforms, what we know as the internet, is absolutely flooded with bad actors from KGB Central, from the Islamic Islamo-communism underworld, funding all the trolling and the rampant anti-Semitism of it all. This involves TikTok and lots of other things. It's reprehensible, obscene, and they wheel out the same old tired anti-Jewish doggerel decade after decade. None of it with any meaning whatsoever. It's so paltry, and we've step by step gone through it all on Unslaved. All these references from the Talmud and all of it, all the anti-Semitic doggerel can be swept aside easily once you know what's been going on. That is not your problem. Israel is not your problem. Far from it. And we still have work to do on that, though.
Yeah, from what I'm gathering, it's just such a vast subject, and it includes diving into many subjects simultaneously, which I know is incredibly difficult to do. And the average person doesn't either have the time or desire to take the time to do it. So at least we do have these platforms that we can collate all together, give people the information, and then hopefully they can take the time to actually validate it for themselves. Good to see more people are, though. I'm encouraged to see a lot more people didn't really fall for this set of shenanigans that have gone over the past few weeks, done by all these paid actors and woke right or woke left and the whole thing. They haven't fallen for it. And that's good to see, but so many still are. And I think there's many well-meaning people that are as well, which is why we got to keep doing this. So if you can catch those curious researchers who got into this kind of research years ago, maybe something woke them up, maybe it was the pandemic, maybe it was 9/11, maybe it was something else, and they got into it, a well-meaning person can be led astray by expert, well-trained psychological warfare agents, right? You got to be careful about that. And then also people will lead you astray with their own ignorance as well. And there's that to be brought into bear. But just before we move into the final section of this one, Michael, you had brought up a link you wanted me to show up here, something to do with Islam. Here, I can bring it up for everybody. This one here talking about something called dimitude. I don't know how many people know what that word means or what this is.
Well, that's right. Just go to dimitude laws on Wikipedia or on any online encyclopedia and look it up. When I mentioned earlier how poorly Jews and Christians were treated during any kind of Islamic dominion, whether it's the Ottoman Empire or anywhere else, just research that one page, and that will give you an insight into what we're talking about. And when you get this, when you understand something about the way Islam has treated both Jews and Christians down through the time since their beginning in the 8th century, never again, ever will you take the side of any Muslim or Islamic group, like you're having the LGBTQ and the progressives and the Democrats, right? All of that will go once you know the facts. When you know who your real enemy is and how your people were treated for centuries, and that even the richest and wealthiest Jews, for the most part of their time, were treated like animals, then even though you're in the 21st century, you will know what's going on, and you will know what stance to take when it comes to Islam and its spread. Okay, just study that one page, and you'll have to rethink, because otherwise you'll be caught up in it. They have released unto the world their experts, these burqa wearing Ilhan Omars and AOCs, as you mentioned, to again bamboozle and hoodwink. But I think if you just study these simple things that we're talking about, you'll be immunized toward all of the claims of these primitives, and you'll know where you stand and why you stand with the West and who your enemy is. You've got to brush up on that. You can't be, allowing them to dictate the narrative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, let me bring here we go. And yeah, there's much more to go into on those things, but just getting into that alone, I think will help people understand this on a deeper level. If the evidence of all of the attacks across the Western world over the past 20 years isn't enough, like open attacks on our soil again and again and again.
Hundreds.
Go to an AI. If you don't have the time to go do it, go to like a Grok or whatever, ChatGPT, and just put in how many jihadist attacks have occurred on Western nations in the last 20 years or so. Just start there. And that's not getting into what you were breaking down of all the funding, where this all came from, how it's all organized from the top. But just to give people like a cold shower, you listen to a Tommy Robinson or somebody like that, who he wasn't one of the guys that fell off a fucking wagon with this. He just got out of jail and he's still trying to slap people awake with this. And other guys as well that have been out there blowing the whistle. But just, getting into even some of the films that we're talking about the history with this, like El Cid and many others we've referenced. There's a legitimate history to that about what our ancestors here in the West had to put up with. And the fact that we're just open door policy here. I'm hearing that in Canada, they're now accepting in some of the guys from the Iranian regime. Like, are you, and again, this isn't I come in and I go, look, I've studied religions my whole life because I'm very curious about that subject. And there are many things about all these religions that I love if they're put in the right context. And there's many things in there that don't make any sense at all unless you understand how these ancient cults operated and what was really going on with them. You've been given a sanitized version of history. I think everybody can agree on that. You've also been given a sanitized version of how these cults and these religious movements even were formed and who formed them. And then the history that happened after that. So that's another thing we've done on Unslaved. But, this isn't an indictment personally for me saying anything about the average Muslim, Jew, Christian, Buddhist, whatever, atheist. It's that one thing you highlighted, Michael, in a brilliant clip that I've put out many times for people when they come at me with the whole anti-Semitic stuff, is you were bringing up how if you're looking for the poison pill here, you can't just look to one group and just have this one brand. You've got to look at this left-wing politics, which is what we're talking about, which is now left, right. But it's this woke or this, it's basically, I think it comes from, it comes from the occult world that's been put into the surface layers that people don't know about. And it's a bastardized version that's led to lead average people astray. So they go to the church or the mosque or the synagogue to just have a spiritual connection of some kind or a community connection. They maybe look at themselves culturally as identifying with that particular faith. Like there's a lot of cultural Christians and cultural Muslim, there's that. But what we're looking at here is the penetration of the cabinets, as Klaus Schwab would say, when it comes to your religious institutions. So you can look to the history of the Vatican. You can look to the history of you brought into the Middle East that nobody knows about. You can find it in Judaism as well. You can find it in the secular world as well. The infiltration of these Marxists. They called it the long march through the institutions for a reason. Okay. And this has been a slow capture. And the one thing they all agree on is they hate Western culture. They hate the West. They hate the principles of the rest. They hate the freedom principle. They hate the idea of an individual that has their own thoughts and rights. And they definitely hate America. And one thing they bring up is, well, the reason, like if a Dave Smith comedian was sitting in here, be like, well, the reason they hate America is because America bombed them. That's the only reason. Just because they went in and like for no reason at all, just went and bombed everybody. And that's why they hate the West. That definitely adds to it. But what you've shown is that this goes back to something that the world doesn't know about. And I put this quote that I got from I think it was the one we did called Islamo-communism on Unslaved. It was just a sentence you said that I put in my presentation. and I'll bring it up for you. I'd love you to kind of wrap on this one. It's that all nations are deceived about the origin of the ancient feuds that have split the world. It was just such a powerful statement. And that's how I started off that occult history of communism. And I just thought maybe we could expand just a little bit on zooming up the level here as to how old, how big, and how grand this agenda to destroy the West has actually been.
Oh, yes. I'm glad you did. See, Islam has always been inimical to Christianity and to Judaism from its start, prior to any left-wing involvement, right? We've got to understand that it was unimaginably violent, conquestative, and oppressive right from day one. So when you mentioned Amir Tahiri and the history of its violence against Christians and Jews, this is a given from its it's not a religion of peace. It's been inimical to Christianity and to the West from day one. But the point I was trying to make through this whole presentation is that when it, during about the First World War, became infected with this communistic, socialistic ideology, the hatred for Christianity, Judaism, and the West now went through the fucking roof. Which was already there to start, was already poisonous to begin with. Now, you combine it with progressive thinking. It's all the plan of the Illuminati. Now, around about the Berlin Wall fall, scrolling forward to 89, 90, 91, this is when a lot of things got mobilized, to which the neoconservatives are trying to react. Once you get it into perspective, what are they reacting against? Is because now that the hardcore Bolshevik type of communism has been found not to work, it's crumbled under its own weight, it's proving impotent. The forces that be said, right, but we've had in the background this phenomena, this other monstrosity called Islamo-communism. They also had, of course, as we know, the cultural form of Marxism, which they're going to unleash. And that's how they'll poison the Democrats, the liberals. But that's not the only form of attack. When the Bolshevik plan, that version didn't work, there's two other, right, monsters of this hydra. One we know about, which is progressivism, and our research community has been down on that. That's good. We do have knowledge about that. But this other one is allowed to thrash around, and almost no one, except a few people we've mentioned, ever talks about it. And it is as powerful as the other. It's been unleashed. It was there in the background, but I said it only was there for some intellectuals. It probably would never have had power, but it got power. And when these Turkish ideologues were allowed almost free access into Germany, they joined the universities there and start spreading, it from Germany and Hungary and other countries as well. In India, they were given full power. In Pakistan, full power. In Libya, all the rest of it. And in Iran, now we realize. But we've got to be very aware of these attempts to sort of, again, this monotheism, focus only on this, focus, they'll allow that. So we hunker down. And neoconservatism understood towards the Reagan and the end of Reagan period, groups of people in America, some of them well-meaning, started to realize what I've just said. And they said, right, we're going to have to come down violently. We've got to do something about this. It was understandable. Okay? And it's not difficult to see why this was thought of as a solution. To just go out there and spread the American empire. They didn't see any of the downside of it. And that it would maybe even weaponize these jihadist types of groups. But see, I knew about this way, way back from living in Ireland. My parents were Marxists. and also started to notice how everyone who supported the IRA were running around with these, Palestinian headscarves and waving the flag. And so, of course, one has to notice, what's that all about? Oh, and then you dig deeper and you find out that, wait a minute, the IRA are getting all of its weapons from Libya. What? You see? So slowly you discover this whole Mazzini plan, that there's more going on. And then you watch the punk movement, the anarchist movement, all pro-Palestinian, pro-PLO, and you see the graffiti, and you see the murals, and you see the marches, And so suddenly, somebody who's an anti-Marxist like me starts to question, why are these Irish nationalists supporting Palestine and supporting the Muslim cause? This doesn't make sense. I thought you didn't like oligarchs, right? The Arabs are some of the richest people in the world. What, it doesn't make sense again. Oh, but then you work it out. These are champagne socialists. It's what you're looking for is the socialistic element. You see, so slowly by being in Ireland and noticing how it works, you peel off the surface hype, and you get to realize what's really going on. And then with this money that they've all inherited, and their actors on television at that time, through movies, documentaries, they fund the anti-Western, anti-Jewish, they put out all this propaganda. Then when the internet came along, it's literally a tornado of the same thing. But it's almost like the lady doth protest too much. What they've actually stupidly done, especially this was on Facebook, it could be seen clearly by any sane person, is that they inundated it too much. And they left footprints. And people could see that this couldn't possibly be individuals in the world just putting up these pro-Gaddafi, pro-Putin, memes and all the rest of it, the pro-China stuff, the TikTok stuff, whatever. No, this is too much. They overdid it. And so this caught on. And now we have court cases in which Mark Zuckerberg has been openly, this is on the congressional level, been accused of being a Chinese agent, and that Facebook is nothing but KGB Central, operating out of the China. But again, be very aware to even widen that out. But yeah, some of this is now leaking to the surface. But there's more to be done, and on Enslaved we're going to do it. There's pieces I wish I could get into. But, we'll have to hold back on that right now because, again, it has to be done systematically. It's so earth-shattering, you see, that to do it in just sound bites is simply not going to work. The case has to be laid out in that way, much more succinctly, so that people, again, are not, one of the great bugbears of our age is that it's just all sound bites, that everybody's knowledge, because they're just focused on the social media aspects, they're not being roundly educated into what progressivism really is, all of its different tentacles. So we try to bring to the public, the names of the authors that can help you here, to save you time. Go to their websites, watch their films, watch their videos, and read their books. Build up a little library of their works. There's many that we mention on Enslaved all the time.
Well, very good. And yeah, guys, it's so big, and especially when you bring in the ancient feuds and rivalries. And we went into a whole thing on the history of the Templars, because this obviously brings up the incursion, the bringing together of the East and West, and what really happened in these secret society networks, and getting into what went down in some of these Masonic lodges that actually also adopted this socialist ideology, and then pumped it in through the French Revolution. And so many, there's just so many layers to this that bring us up to where we are right now. And it's like the hidden history of the world, especially the hidden history of the Western world, and what really, and it explains it gives you more context to what's happening. And then it's an easier thing to identify who are the goodies, who are the baddies, who are the people really fighting for the truth and fighting for the West and fighting for freedom, and who are the ones who are just playing a part in in a movie, right? Who are just playing a part. And that's why, I'm glad I was able to bring the work that I was able to do and bring you on this show and do Unslaved, because it's literally the only place you're going to find this very unique blend of research from these authors, and not just mentioned casually, deep dives into the books, into the sightings, into the sources. For those of you out there who are like, where's the proof? Where's the proof? You're not going to find a show out there that's going to like give you university level information in terms of sources. Every episode on Unslaved sourced to the yin yang. All the articles you've done, it's a compendium of source material. So you can go to the sources, you can go to the horse's mouth on this. And then, after you do that, your job is pretty easy because it's all just happening in front of you right now. It's all just very blatantly obvious once you understand these missing pieces that have not been presented to anybody. And that's why I'm glad we're able to do this. I think we should keep this show short and start to wrap it here, because we don't want it to go too long, because I want people to actually sit through and watch this. And then I think I'm going to do a separate show down the line, maybe in a week or so, once the dust is settled on some of these things, and I'll go through a little more of the backstory that I've got. But if you want to get caught up, guys, go check it out, unslaved.com. Go check out Substack. Go and follow Michael's Substack. Go read the articles. I'll start posting on my X account and on my notes account on Substack. I'll start posting some of the references we've gone through here and some other sources for people that might be interested in learning about this. And I hope we can do this again soon. And also, Michael, we've got some crazy things coming up on Unslaved too, to keep going into, expanding more on these subjects. We've been doing the Dead Sea Scrolls. We've been doing many subjects that we've been following, but I feel like it's all really starting to come together. So did you have any closing remarks there to leave people with here?
Well, no, you did that's a great closing there, but I will say that, you see, our campaign to educate the world on this was seriously retarded for almost a decade because of shadow banning. We would be a lot further ahead. I'm very conscious that we're way behind when it comes to reaching the public with this information, because we had to go and do it through Unslaved, right? It could have been done another way, but your Facebooks and your Googles and your YouTubes prevented us doing that. So this means that we can really pat ourselves on the back that we didn't give up. With that kind of obstacles, you just say, well, then fuck it. I'm not going to, let people rot. But instead, we diligently and under the gun, we continued. So it's all there for Unslaved. People can find it there. We didn't stop, regardless of being shadow banned and put into a box and try to, attempts to be silent. So what we've got there, members are able to, dig deep into that information that the general public didn't get hold of, and might never have got hold of if we had made the choice to say, well, then the hell with it. But we labored in the dark, continued with the research regardless, to get this information out. We've had Ralph Ellis on talking about Islamo-communism. We've had Charles Moskowitz and others, Trevor Louden. And you and I have done many, many programs on it from that angle to really help bring it out so that people can see so much more. And this will then help a lot for people to get a perspective that's, just not out there. And as I say, it's not even out there today anywhere near the mainstream. And there is even more to come. There'll be, because of this holdback, even though we did great on Enslaved to keep going, actually some stuff is still there on the shelf. Nothing can be done about it. But what the good part of it is it will be got to. The coda, the swan song, the final pieces of the puzzle still need to be put in. But I know that members who are diligent and been following it, well, they'll have those pieces leading up and they'll know what it's all about. But when these things happen in the modern media today, these events, it's very, very important, because these are helpful then to have periods where things leak out. So when you saw some of the conservative reaction and the climbing the walls, and the doomsday merchants talking about it's all over, we're going to be in a war forever against, and time again, they've used this line and they've been proven false all along. But it's okay, because this helps bring it to light. Sometimes something happens, I don't know, to bring things to light, to draw attention to a particular issue. And we can be grateful for that, to spark interest again. And people saying, yeah, I don't think I've been given the whole of the truth by the media. And on that, you can be absolutely sure. It'd be wonderful if they would interview the people we've mentioned, and go into these subjects, but they don't. So you're lumbered with, having to do it yourself. So on Slave, we've made that job a lot easier for people to be able to do, and we totally know the history and how this stuff plays out in real time right now. It is a problem. This third branch of the communistic agenda is as important as progressivism and cultural Marxism. It is a creeping disease, a form of creeping death. And if we're not alert to it, to stop it, to push back at it, the West is imperiled. And you talked about this latest thing with the mayor of New York, being possibly voted in. Think of all of the different Islamic candidates that are now running that are mayors in London, including the mayor of London, and the president, the prime minister of London, this Rishi Sunak, and all these people. All over, in Bristol, Brighton, all over. It's just, do you know how many mosques there are? The most common name in Ireland is Mohammed. The most common boy's name. People are worried about a Jewish conspiracy, and the most common name of a boy in Ireland is Mohammed. Okay. Carry on.
They're just going to say, oh, the Jews did that. They're going to destroy the West using Islam. And that's their.
Right. No, that's why we've got a fight on our hands. We've got to counterbalance that and bring people back to sanity. It's hard work, but somebody's got to do it, right?
Somebody's got to do it. That's right. Well, well done, and appreciate you again joining in last minute. I want to thank everybody for jumping on. We got a lot of people watching right now, which is great. Please go back. If you missed any part of this, go back and watch every second of it. Make sure you get it all. And we'll be doing more in the future on this. Go check out Unslaved, support us there, and check out the incredible library that we have. As I said in the beginning, you can also check us out on Substack. We're now over there. Loving that platform. Really easy access. You can follow Michael over there as well. He's in the Substack notes, social media, so he's sharing stuff all the time. And we definitely have a lot more coming your way on this show and also on Enslaved. And we'll be covering things as events continue to transpire. So thanks to you, Michael. Thanks to everybody for watching. We'll catch everybody again soon here on Truth Warrior. Cheers, everybody.